to the Edge of Analytics series. My name is Brian Beesley. I am the director of the data science practice here at CCG. With me today is John Merryman, who is an advanced analytics consultant with us, and he is here to tell us a little bit about the predictive analytics process, which is something that many of you are probably interested in, may or may not know what happens behind the scenes when those data scientists and advanced analytics folks go off and produce predictive and prescriptive analytics. So that's what we're here today to get. So John, before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi everyone. My name is John Merryman. I have an industrial engineering degree from the University of South Florida. One thing I noticed with industrial engineering during my curriculum, during my time at school, I was finding there's kind of two different routes. There's one route that's more so process improvement, process management. You usually find yourself in a factory doing manufacturing processes, something along those lines. That was a little bit less interesting to me. The part that I was really resonating with was the data analytics side, which is why I'm here today, which is why I'm now focusing my career path on advanced analytics and data science. And to this point, my experience has mostly been in the retail industry.
So we're going to get into the predictive analytics process, right? But in order to understand that a little bit better, can you help us understand what is predictive analytics, or what is a predictive model?
Sure. So in predictive analytics, generally what we're trying to do is we're trying to give our best guess on a new data point that we are creating based off of the data that we currently have. So the data that we currently have would be normally called our predictive variables, and what we're trying to predict is our target variable. So the thing to keep in mind with predictive analytics is that it's best to follow a mathematical approach over what is oftentimes referred to as gut feel. So you might think that you know all of these things, but maybe you ate something different for breakfast that morning and it changed the way you felt. So that's kind of the thought, is that if we can follow a mathematical approach, there will be some uncertainty which can improve over time as the model is continued to be trained. Really, in predictive analytics, we want to get to a point that we call prescriptive. So prescriptive is in which we are able to not only predict an outcome occurring, but we can give recommended business actions based off of that outcome. So now we're getting into the area of like, okay, we know this is maybe going to happen. How can we formulate our business strategy around that?
So to help us all sort of understand a little bit better what a predictive model is, could you help by giving us an example of a predictive application you may have done recently?
So the client that I currently work for is a retail client. My team and I built a predictive model that was taking details from a customer's first purchase and using those details as our predictor variables to predict whether or not the customer will make a second purchase within a year and a half of that first purchase.
So that's a really interesting use case. How did you guys decide on that use case for being something that was worth tackling?
It more or less came down to a prioritization conversation. So we have a backlog filled with use cases, some of them feasible, some of them not currently feasible because maybe we don't have the right data available. Maybe the business just isn't ready to take on that use case. So this is one that we had the data readily available. We had the resources, the people that wanted to work on it, and it was relevant to the business at that time.
Got it. So once you've selected a use case, right, we're gonna do some experimentation with, let's say, this customer rebuy example, right? Mm-hmm. What do you do next? What does the process look like after that? Sure.
Once we feel good about the use case going forward, it's a 3-step process. I like to think of it as you have data discovery, data profiling being the first step. The next step would be data preparation, data manipulation, and the last thing that we end up doing is experimenting. Okay. We're going to build multiple models during this process.
So can you tell us more about that first step, which was the data discovery and data profiling?
Absolutely. So data discovery is really just discovering the data that we have available to us. Sometimes we will reach out and try to get other data sources if it means it's going to improve the model. But the data profiling side is more so the digging into the data that we have. What are the data types, the data distributions, keeping in mind that we will be creating multiple models, so certain models have certain data requirements. So throughout this process, we are tracking our changes in our data profile, and we're making sure that we're taking care of things that, like maybe inconsistencies such as misspelling. Sometimes there are outliers. We want to identify those through potentially doing histograms and getting an idea of just the distribution of the data per each field.
Sure. So, and then the next phase after that was sort of your data manipulation, feature engineering, that kind of stuff. So
Exactly.
Tell us what that is.
So some of the things that we just had identified through the discovery and the profiling phase as creating dummy variables, taking care of some of those misspellings or binning, or potentially one example is you might have, say, the number of items in that first order as a variable. We might be better suited looking at the average price per item.
You're collecting the information in one place, right? And then you're starting to design variables that you think are going to be the most impactful, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So one of the ways that I always like to think about that is what would a human expert look at to try and make a same decision, right? So if a human was looking at the same first purchase and was trying to decide, do I think this person's going to buy again or not, right? What are all the things that they would look at?
Yeah, and that's one really cool part about the process is that we get that opportunity to think as humans and think, okay, well, what I found myself during the process, what are things that could be leading to employee satisfaction or dissatisfaction, just in general, to see is it possible that this customer had bought maybe one item that was very expensive in their first order, and maybe that's causing them not to come back. So we do get the opportunity to think as humans, but then we kind of place it in more of a mathematical approach throughout the process.
Right, so it's taking those things that a human would intuitively want to look at and making those things formal in the data set that you're going to use for modeling.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Cool. All right, so you've gone out and explored your data, so you know what you have available, right? You've profiled it, so you know what pitfalls there are, and then you've gathered it in one place and started to manipulate it so that you've got a data set that is useful for modeling. All right, now it's time to actually apply those algorithms.
Yep.
How do you go about doing that?
Taking a set of data which we know the answer to the target variable. So in this case, whether or not someone makes a purchase within a year and a half. Say we are looking at only customers that made their first purchase 2 years ago. All of those customers should have either a yes or a no to that question. So what we want to do is get rid of that answer, use just all of our predictive variables, run the model, and see what we get. From there, we can then define the accuracy. How many did we get right? How many did we get wrong?
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So you're trying different algorithms with the data, right? How do you decide which algorithm is the best algorithm to use at the end?
Okay. So it's a couple of different factors. The main thing being the model accuracy. So how well are we predicting our target variable? So we can do that through splitting up our data into a training set and a testing set, in which we're basically using our training set to develop the model, to feed the predictions. And then the testing set is where we're going to withhold the target variable, and we're going to then predict the target variable and see, did we predict it right? How often did we predict it right? Yeah. And then to go into the second part is the fact that by the time you're done with this whole process, say you've ran a few different models, 5 to 10 models, somewhere in that range, and you start to identify front runners, then what is often done is a cost-benefit analysis. So you might have potentially a model that has better accuracy, such as like a neural network, SVM, something that is a little bit more complex, that is predicting better, but it's also taking much longer to run, say, than a regression model of some sort. So you end up finding yourself in that there's a small degree of accuracy leaning towards this model, but it's going to cost a lot more to run that on a continuous basis.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that I've actually found to be very useful when doing experimentation with models, is just to start with the simpler models, right?
Yep.
Because they're typically easier to understand, to explain, so that business users know what's happening and how these predictions are being made than the more complex models, and they run faster. So if you're able to get a good degree of accuracy or model performance with a simpler model, right, then that's typically the best way. It seems like a simple enough process. For those out there that are maybe looking to get into data science as a profession, what advice would you have for them?
Oh, man. I would say, I think we've used the word iterative a couple of times. It's very iterative. You're going to go through and you're going to do things multiple times, and you need to document along the way. You need to stay very organized. That data profile that we discussed earlier is one of the more important things to the process to me. Just really keeping yourself organized, knowing the changes you've made along the way have been tracked, and you can explain them if you're asked in a business setting.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks for your time today. It was very insightful. So, as always, if you ever have any analytics needs, feel free to reach out to CCG, and we'll be happy to help. Thank you.
Thanks.